Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you, and today I want to have a bit of a discussion video about those times where I'm going to leave my knife in my pocket. Now, what I'd love to hear in the comments down below is some of your advice about those times where you've had a knife on you and you chose not to use it for various reasons. Maybe the discussion that we're going to have here in a minute will help you with that. First, let me say this, okay? I'm like most of you. I take great pride in the knife that I'm carrying. I really enjoy carrying a knife. And, when someone says, oh man, I need a knife for something, I'm, the first one to jump up and be like, da 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 da, I've got a knife, let's cut whatever needs to be cut. I use my knife for things that I don't need to use it for, right? My wife has often said, Kevin, why are you using a knife to cut open, your kid's box of Smarties? And I'm like, well, come on, because that's the most fun way to open a box of Smarties. Well, I, like you, want to look for every excuse to get my knife out and use it. There are times where discretion is the better part of valor. So let's talk about some of those times, beginning with probably the most common area that we think we ought to be using a knife, and that is at work. Okay, now I'm not talking about an office job where you can carry a knife like this or a little Spyderco Sage or something like that and use it to open a package now and then, or to cut up the kielbasa in your lunch, right? I'm talking about, a factory job, or, maybe a warehouse, a construction site, a mechanic, those kinds of jobs. And even, if you're doing construction work around your house, you're putting a new roof on, you're fixing the plumbing, you're putting down a new floor, those types of jobs are almost never going to be ideal for a folder, okay? Really, most of the time, you'd be much better off with an Olfa knife. And by the way, I'm going to do a video review of an Olfa knife because I absolutely believe they are the best, most versatile, most worthwhile of all the utility knives out there. I love Olfa knives. I've got 2 or 3 of them in multiple packs of blades. I love the thicker blades that are a little tougher and a little bendier. Great option. And if I'm cutting carpet, if I'm working on drywall, if I'm roofing, if I'm doing almost anything, I'm going to have an Olfa knife with me, okay? And why? Well, number one, there's a great deal of potential to damage your knife irreparably, right? A lot of times on a construction site, you could drop your knife down a hole that hasn't been backfilled. You could drop it into wet concrete. You could drop it just from a height. If you're 20 or 30 feet in the air and you drop your knife, guess what? It might be bye-bye, right? It could be all done. And for me, I'm not interested in replacing my knife all the time. I'd rather keep that knife. And if I'm going to use a knife, I'm going to replace the $8 or $10 Olfa knife rather than the $80 or $100 or however many other dollars of the folder is that I'm carrying that day. So that's part of it. But number two, the things that you're cutting, okay? If you're cutting bags of concrete open, if you're cutting up against bricks, how many times have you cut Tyvek where you're cutting the material along a brick ledge or along poured concrete? Of course, I'm going to use an Olfa knife for that, because when the job is done, the blade is going to have to be thrown away. I'd much rather throw the blade away on an Olfa knife than throw the blade away on this knife, right? This is not a CRKT home front, so you can't just pop the blade out of here. I'm going to pick a blade that I don't mind destroying, okay? So that's number one, at work. And the reason I bring that one up is because a lot of people, talk about, I'm looking for a knife for work. And usually I say, get an Olfa knife. And then you don't have to worry about, then I can make a better recommendation for a folder for you, okay? Number one. Number two, in a fight. Now, I know a lot of people, maybe not a lot, but a few people who carry knives carry them specifically for self-defense, especially, a knife that's something like this, even, like this. Even this knife is really a pretty tactically oriented knife in terms of the shape, the size, all of that. However, there are really a fairly small number of times where it's going to be helpful for you to get out your folder in a physical altercation, okay? And why? Well, because number one, if you're just pissed off at somebody and you're getting in a physical altercation to prove who's the bigger man, no one needs to die in that situation. That's pretty obvious. Number two, though, if you're in a real physical fight where your life is at risk, there are probably better defensive and offensive options than a knife. I mean, a heavy stick, a bat, a hatchet, a brick, a stone, a chair, a fire extinguisher. Almost anything that can do blunt force trauma is going to be more effective at keeping someone away from you or stopping a fight by knocking a person out than a knife, right? And people who knife fight, they're trained to know the areas to cut someone that's gonna debilitate them. Okay, I maybe know some of those areas, but I'm certainly not trained to hit them every time, and I don't practice this over and over again. So I'd rather use something where, one swing, one time, one down, over, threat is eliminated. Hit somebody with a baseball bat almost anywhere, and the fight is done, right? You don't have to deal with it. So outside of, some very limited circumstances where, you'd have no other option, a knife is not going to be a good option or not going to be a good, useful tool in a physical altercation. Now, I said most of the time, right? Keep that in the back of your mind. Thirdly, I've still got two other options here. Thirdly, around people you don't want to see use your knife. Now, it could be people who are uncomfortable with your knife, okay? That's totally possible, but it could also be people who you kind of know, maybe they're younger kids, maybe it's your buddy who wrecks everything they go near, maybe it's people who just don't appreciate the value of whatever it is you're carrying that day. There are times where I don't want to give just anybody the knife that I've got in my pocket. Now, you can, and I sometimes do carry an extra knife that I can lend. Or I'll give someone, it's fairly safe to give someone a fixed blade. I have often had people where I've given them a knife and I've been very concerned that they were going to cut themselves, right? So I've thought, yeah, I better give them a fixed blade. At least that way there's no confusion about how this thing operates, okay? So there are people who you don't want to have your knife. And in that case, either one, don't mention that you have a knife. If everyone knows that you do, then carry an extra one that you can hand out. Or, I usually have a multi-tool nearby, and that'll come up probably again. But I usually have a multi-tool nearby, and the blades on those are crappy anyway, so I'll often lend somebody that if they need to cut something, and I'm not sure if I want to give them my knife. So those are a few reasons. Let's see. Number 4. This is another big one. In an emergency situation, so car accident, medical emergency, unless you really, really have no other choice, probably leave your knife in your pocket, okay? Imagine, I don't know, someone is in cardiac arrest or someone has suffered some kind of blunt force trauma, and the first person providing first aid says, we got to get this clothes off this person. Don't rip your knife out of your pocket, open it up and start cutting, okay? There's too high of a risk that something bad could happen, right? Maybe it's not you, okay? Maybe you're going to be very, very careful and you're going to make sure that, the blade of the knife is always away and you're going to be super safe, but you don't know. That person could have a seizure, right? That person could all of a sudden, if they're unconscious or semi-conscious, all of a sudden something could set them off and they leap up or they start flailing their arms around, or, you don't know what could happen. And if you've got a knife, right there on someone's chest and all of a sudden they decide to jump up, that could end badly, right? If you've got a knife, slicing the arm, the sleeve off of someone's coat, and all of a sudden they start flailing their arm around, right? You can see where there's potential for not only hurting the patient, but hurting yourself. Another situation is cutting a seatbelt off a car. This is one where, that's a legitimate reason to carry a knife. However, you're going to have to put some thoughtfulness into that and make sure you're cutting. Usually in this scenario, there are lots of places you can cut the seatbelt that's nowhere near the patient, okay? But if you do have to cut near the patient, I would be pretty hesitant to use a knife for that. Now, what if you're the patient or your family member is? Consider what's going to happen. Let's say you've had a rollover and you decide, I'm going to cut my seatbelt off. Hey, good for you. But what's going to happen when you fall with an open knife? right? Are you gonna land on the knife? Are you gonna land on someone else? Is someone else who you've cut out gonna land on your knife? Okay, so think about all of that stuff. Most of the time, emergency situation, there are better tools out there. Rescue Me is an awesome tool. They work really well. And I'll put a link. They're like 10 bucks on Amazon.com. I'll put a link in the description. And I think everyone should carry a Rescue Me all the time. Number 5, don't get your knife out for something that it was not intended to do, okay? I've got a fixed blade here, and if I was gonna baton, I would use this over any other knife here, okay? Now, I know that when you bought that cold steel knife, you were watching all the cold steel videos and they were cutting pigs in half and they were like chopping down trees and doing everything else with the cold steel knife, and you're totally convinced that, you know, if someone was firing a machine gun at you, you could hold up your Recon 1 and it would deflect all the bullets back at the attacker just like a lightsaber. And it probably would, okay? But I wouldn't recommend it for that. You know, try to avoid your ego. And I told guys, I've been there. Okay, I've cut down trees with folders a lot of times for testing, and I've also ruined knives. Okay, even a cold steel knife, you go chopping on something with this or batoning, and there's a good chance you'll deform some of the metal in here, and so now your knife isn't going to lock up right, or it's going to have up and down blade play, or whatever other issue you've now introduced. Okay. So if I'm going to chop down a tree, I'm going to use a chainsaw. If I don't have one, I'll use an axe. If I don't have one, I'll use a hatchet. Not likely am I going to use my Recon 1 or my Contigo or F3 or anything else on this table. Okay, so you know, kind of there's a big ego thing that comes in here, and this is the best, toughest, strongest knife ever made, and maybe it is. Okay, I would argue that the 4 Max probably is the strongest folding knife in existence, but that doesn't mean I should use it to, you know, pry rims off of cars or, you know, chop down trees or, you know, slaughter pig carcasses the way they do in cold steel videos. Also, I'm not going to go and pry with any knife. This is the only one, and I purposely got this one just for this reason. Yeah, there is a thick Spanto edge on here that I could use to sort of slide under something and do a little prying, and I think this knife would be fine in that role. In fact, I think Dave thought about that application when he made this knife, but even this knife, I'm probably not going to pry with it, okay? I always have a multi-tool nearby, and I have a pry tool in my pocket. I'm actually getting ready to do a video on a number of good pry tool options that are out there. And so if you've got any recommendations, put those in the description box down below. So there you go, guys. Those are 5 times and places where I would leave my knife in my pocket. I'd love to hear what yours are. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and we will talk to you soon.